On the morning of February 26th, in the year 1945, precisely at 9 o'clock, Private First Class Douglas Jacobson found himself crouched behind a jagged outcrop of volcanic rock on the western flank of Hill 382, a vital and fiercely contested position during the Battle of Eniwetok. His gaze was fixed ahead, where a small team wielding a bazooka was engaged in a tense standoff with enemy fire, aiming at a Japanese 20mm anti-aircraft gun that was spitting death in their direction. Jacobson, barely 19 years of age, had already participated in 3 island campaigns in the Pacific Theater, yet he was still unadorned by any decorations, his youthful face shadowed by the harsh realities of war. During his early years, he had enlisted in the United States Marine Corps Reserve at the age of 17, a decision driven by a fierce desire to serve and to contribute to the fight, even if it meant bending the truth about his age to get accepted into the ranks. Prior to enlisting, he had worked as a draftsman, assisting his father back home in Port Washington, New York, applying his skills to drawing and designing. During summers, he had also spent his days as a lifeguard, patrolling the sandy beaches of Long Island, always ready to leap into action to save lives. Now, he was among the members of Company I, part of the 3rd Battalion of the 23rd Marines, which itself was a component of the 4th Marine Division, all of them desperately pinned down on the most heavily fortified hill on Eniwetok Island. The island itself was an inland stretch of only about 8 square miles of volcanic ash and death, a barren landscape scarred by relentless combat. Just 5 days prior, a formidable force of 30,000 Marines had stormed ashore, expecting to encounter minimal resistance. Their assumptions, however, had proved to be tragically mistaken. Military intelligence had been catastrophically flawed. The Japanese commander, Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribi-Bayashi, had spent 8 months transforming the small island of Eniwetok into an impregnable fortress. He had engineered a labyrinth of defenses, 18 kilometers of tunnels, dozens of concrete pillboxes, hidden artillery emplacements, and the towering hill 382, which was the highest elevation to the north of Mount Suribachi. This central feature anchored a meticulously crafted defensive system designed to inflict maximum casualties on any attacking force. Marines nicknamed this sector the Meat Grinder, and the name was no metaphor. Every attack, every assault, over the past 7 days had confirmed the brutal truth of that moniker. Nearly half of the 23rd Marine strength had already been lost. Company after company had tried to seize Hill 382, and each attempt had ended in the same horrific fashion. The Japanese defenders waited patiently until the Marines crossed the open ground, then unleashed a lethal barrage from well-concealed positions that remained intact despite artillery bombardments intended to destroy them. Sherman tanks belonging to the U.S. forces had been set ablaze, their crews consumed by the chaos. Flamethrower units, brave, but ultimately vulnerable, had perished before they could reach their targets. Entire squads disappeared into the volcanic ash, their fates sealed in the grim silence of the battlefield. Hill 382 rose abruptly, standing 125 feet above the black, volcanic beaches that stretched behind it. Up close, it appeared as a grim fortress, its summit riddled with a labyrinth of interconnected bunkers, reinforced fighting positions, and concealed firing points. The Japanese defenses had been meticulously crafted to perfection. Around every approach, 15mm anti-tank guns commanded the terrain, capable of crushing any armored vehicle that dared get too close. Machine gun nests spread along the flanks, providing overlapping fields of fire that could cut down attackers from all directions. Small, buried tanks were hidden within crevices and volcanic rocks, remaining undetectable until they suddenly fired deadly rounds. At the very base of the hill, a 20mm anti-aircraft gun continuously swept the open terrain, its blazing fire pattern creating a deadly zone that was nearly impossible for the Marines to cross safely. In this chaos, Jacobson watched as a 2-man bazooka team moved cautiously forward. The loader carried a canvas bag full of 4M6A3 rockets, each designed to punch through armor or fortified positions. The gunner held the launcher, a steel tube almost 4.5 feet long, weighing approximately 13 pounds, ready for action. They advanced slowly, covering about 15 yards, when suddenly the enemy anti-aircraft gun roared to life. The fire erupted like a storm, instantly bringing the two Marines down. The bazooka launcher toppled into the ash, lying abandoned in the dirt and volcanic debris. The entire company was essentially immobilized. Without destroying the anti-aircraft position, the assault, no matter how determined, was doomed to falter and collapse. The toll was already high. Within just the first 30 minutes of the attack, the Marines had suffered the loss of 17 men killed and 26 wounded. The defenders, crushing and invisible, remained hidden amid the jagged rocks. Every stone could be concealing a rifle pit. Every depression might harbor a machine gun emplacement, and the enemy fighters had the advantage of surprise and concealment, striking from unseen vantage points. Many Marines were dying without ever seeing their enemies, their deaths silent and unseen amid the volcanic debris. Jacobson's eyes fell upon the bazooka, lying exposed on the ground. This weapon was designed explicitly for two operators working in unison, one to aim and fire, and the other to load the rocket and connect the electrical ignition wire that would send the deadly projectile streaking toward its target. This was not a weapon meant for solitary use. It required coordination, teamwork, trust, and perfect timing. No Marine, no matter how skilled or brave, could operate a bazooka alone in the chaos of combat beneath such lethal defenses. Every move had to be precise, every second critical, for any mistake could mean death. The fate of the assault, the success of every attempt to break through the Japanese defenses atop Hill 382, depended on the synchronized effort of these two-man teams, working tirelessly amidst the chaos of war to dismantle the fortress that had become an almost insurmountable obstacle in their path. The force of a back blast alone could inflict serious injuries on a soldier who was isolated and caught in its path, underscoring just how dangerous operating such heavy weaponry single-handedly could be. Its significant weight rendered the task of maneuvering and deploying it by a lone gunner almost impossible. Moreover, reloading the weapon while under enemy fire became an even more daunting challenge that traditionally required at least two men working in unison. However, in this particular situation, both of the men needed for such a task had already been killed, victims of the relentless assault. If you are interested in understanding how Jacobson's decision in this critical moment ultimately unfolded and what the consequences were, you might consider engaging with this story by showing your appreciation through an encouragement to support the sharing of these often overlooked tales. Such gestures aid in spreading awareness of stories that history has almost forgotten, ensuring they reach a broader audience. Now, returning to the story of Jacobson, the anti-aircraft machine gun unleashed another burst of fire, sending out a deadly volley that claimed the lives of 3 more Marines who had been bravely fighting for Hill number 382 for over an hour. Despite their valiant efforts, the positions held by the Japanese defenders appeared formidable beyond doubt, almost impenetrable to assault. The spectators in command high above were watching these events unfold closely, aware that a failure at this crucial juncture could spell disaster not only for this particular battalion, but for the entire 4th Marine Division and their broader offensive. Beyond the daunting heights of Hill 382 stretched the surrounding terrain, the amphitheater, Turkey Knob, and the ruins of Minami Village, all teeming with enemy positions bristling with machine guns and artillery. Understanding the gravity of the situation, Jacobson seized his rifle and moved with purpose toward a nearby bazooka, a heavy, unwieldy weapon that could potentially turn the tide. The volcanic ash surrounding the battlefield offered no cover or concealment. Such a featureless, dust-choked landscape meant that Japanese riflemen had a clear, unobstructed line of sight, making any attempt at a stealthy approach nearly impossible. One Marine had already dared to recover the bazooka, making it just 5 yards before a sniper's deadly shot found him, bringing him down instantly. Recognizing the urgency, Jacobson pressed on, undeterred. When he finally reached the weapon, he seized it and prepared for action. Inside the dead loader's canvas bag, for rockets remained, waiting to be fired. He carefully slung the durable canvas strap over his shoulder, feeling the weight of the launcher tube. The load was heavy, and he knew he must move quickly. The tube itself weighed about 13 pounds, made of solid steel, with 4 rockets, each weighing approximately 11 pounds, adding up to a total of around 67 pounds. With all that weight pressing down on him, Jacobson couldn't afford to linger. He had to run, to close the gap between himself and the enemy, who had already begun to track him with their anti-aircraft gun. As he sprinted across the open terrain toward the Japanese position, the high-powered weapon mounted nearby tracked his movements, locking onto him with deadly precision. Without hesitation, the anti-aircraft gun fired, unleashing rounds that tore through the air mere inches from his head and shoulders, forcing him into desperate action. Reacting swiftly, Jacobson dove behind a scattered mass of shattered rocks roughly 30 yards from the enemy emplacement, cover that was minimal but sufficient for the moment. His uniform was instantly coated in volcanic dust, deposited by the dust clouds stirred up by both the battle's chaos and the ash-filled environment. The bazooka tube, warmed by the glaring morning sun, radiated heat, adding to the discomfort of this already tense moment. He had trained extensively on how to operate the weapon, yet firing a bazooka alone was something he had never actually done in combat before. His training emphasized a meticulous step-by-step process designed for 2 operators working seamlessly together. Typically, the gunner would take the firing position, while the loader would insert a rocket into the rear of the tube, then connect the ignition wire to a contact spring, signaling readiness for firing through a tap on the gunner's helmet. Proper safety procedures required the gunner to ensure the back blast area was clear of personnel and then to fire the weapon. This procedure depended heavily on precise coordination between 2 experienced individuals, each performing their role in strict sequence. Without a loader at his side, Jacobson faced the daunting task of manually preparing and firing the bazooka on his own. He set the tube down carefully on the rough ground, then pulled a single M6-3 rocket from the canvas bag. The missile was about 19 inches long, with a shape-charged warhead that contained approximately 1.6 pounds of high explosive, as well as a secondary charge of 6 pounds of explosive to increase its destructive power. The rocket was equipped with 6 stabilizing fins folded against its body underneath the warhead, designed to stabilize its flight. Carefully, he inserted this rocket into the rear of the launcher, making sure it clicked securely into place. Next, he retrieved the coiled ignition wire, an essential component for ensuring the missile would detonate upon impact, and wrapped it around the contact spring mounted on the rear of the launcher. His hands moved swiftly and with practiced precision, knowing that time was of the essence. The Japanese gun crew, meanwhile, had become aware that someone was lurking behind the rocks, likely based on faint sounds or the movement they observed, and they were adjusting their aim accordingly, trying to lock onto his position. Steadying himself, Jacobson lifted the launcher onto his shoulder, feeling the considerable weight pulling him slightly off balance. With his left hand, he supported the tube, while his right hand grasped the wooden trigger mechanism built into the stock. The ladder side attached to the device displayed range gradations marked for 100, 200, 300, and 400 yards, providing him with a rough estimate of the target's distance. He gauged the elevation of the enemy position as roughly around 80 yards away, using his trained eye. The rear of the launcher was completely open, exposing him to the danger of the gun's backblast, a cone of superheated gases and debris that would erupt in a deadly arc behind him when fired. This blast extended approximately 15 meters, creating a zone of intense danger for anyone standing directly behind the tube at that moment. Fortunately, the area behind Jacobson was clear. He was alone in this perilous moment, with no one at his rear to risk injury. Summoning all his nerve, Jacobson stood upright from his cover, took a deep breath, and aligned his sights carefully on the enemy position. With a firm, controlled pull of the trigger, he unleashed the weapon's powerful charge, knowing that a single shot could make all the difference in this critical stand. The circuit was completed, and almost immediately, the ignition of the rocket motor occurred with a sharp, decisive crack inside the launcher tube. The missile, a sleek M6A3, surged forward with incredible speed, hampering the air with a powerful rush of wind as it shot ahead at an astonishing velocity of approximately 80 meters per second. Flames and thick smoke erupted from both ends of the launching device, creating a dramatic spectacle that further signaled the imminent danger. Despite the intense outward recoil being minimal, a small jolt rather than a harsh kick, the force of the explosion produced a deafening blast wave that resonated painfully in his ears, making him momentarily dazed. In just 1 second, the rocket covered a distance of about 80 yards, its trajectory precise and unwavering. Within that fleeting moment, it struck the shield of an anti-aircraft gun mounted further ahead, hitting its target dead center. The impact ignited the shaped charge within the warhead, causing an immediate detonation. A searing jet of molten copper, traveling at around 6,000 meters per second, pierced its way through the steel armor, igniting a violent explosion that obliterated the gun's protective barrier. The blast was so intense that the entire weapon, along with its 4-man crew, was torn apart instantaneously, disintegrating into a fiery flash of orange flames that briefly lit up the battlefield. As the chaos unfolded, the company's reconnaissance began moving forward, scanning the terrain for the next threat. Meanwhile, Jacobson, sensing the urgency, dropped flat onto the ground, instinctively seeking cover and stability. He carefully reloaded, working through the process entirely on his own, without assistance, reapplying a new rocket into the tube from behind, connecting the firing wire, and lifting the launcher once again. The entire rearming procedure, from start to finish, took him precisely 40 seconds. Although a highly trained 2-man team could achieve the same task in just 12 seconds under ideal conditions, Jacobson managed to do it solo, demonstrating remarkable composure and efficiency in the midst of chaos. Suddenly, from their higher position up the slope, 2 Japanese machine gun positions opened fire with deadly intent, their barrels spraying bullets in coordinated bursts. These positions had been patiently waiting for the Marine advance, deliberately concealed amidst the terrain. Their precise fire struck down 3 Marines in the first volley, mowing them down with ruthless efficiency before retreating behind their improvised earth-covered emplacements. These positions were cleverly hidden from direct view, their presence betrayed only by the intermittent flash of muzzle fire, the faint signs of their deadly marksmen. Recognizing the threat, Jacobson swiftly adapted his tactics. He darted to the right, maneuvering to flank the first machine gun nest. The volcanic rock in the area provided him with partial cover, allowing him to stay relatively concealed. From his new position, he observed the enemy's gun tracking and suppressing other targets, preventing the main Marine column from advancing freely. Moving carefully, Jacobson pushed forward until he reached a point approximately 40 yards from the enemy emplacement. Through the sparse cover, he could see the machine gun's barrel traversing horizontally, scanning back and forth across the landscape. With steady hands, he shouldered his bazooka, took aim, and fired. The rocket soared through the air, striking the earth and nearby cover, penetrating into the fortified position before detonating with a deafening explosion. The blast completely obliterated the machine gun and its crew, who were engulfed in a fiery cloud of debris and shrapnel that rained down the hillside violently. The explosion marked a turning point, temporarily neutralizing another threat. However, the remaining enemy weapon quickly responded. Its machine gun swung in Jacobson's direction, now specifically targeting him. Recognizing the danger, Jacobson moved swiftly, crawling about 20 yards to his left to evade the gun's line of fire. He saw the gun crew desperately trying to locate him amid the uneven terrain, firing bursts at the suspected hiding spots, probing for his position. Waiting patiently for an opportunity, Jacobson kept himself concealed until the enemy crew paused momentarily to reload. Seizing his chance, he rose carefully, raised his launcher to his shoulder, and aimed directly at the gun nest. As they reloaded, the gun crew finally saw him, swinging their barrel in his direction in a desperate attempt to shoot him down. But Jacobson was faster. He fired first, and his rocket hit the mount immediately, causing a sizable explosion. While the blast was smaller compared to his previous shot, it was nevertheless lethal, reducing the entire machine gun emplacement, a small, reinforced concrete structure faced with volcanic rock, to rubble. In the aftermath, the machine gun was silent, and from the debris emerged a wounded Japanese soldier, crawling painfully from the wreckage. A Marine, part of Company I, quickly took the shot, ending the soldier's suffering. With 3 targets eliminated so far, 2 machine guns and 1 enemy combatant, Jacobson was aware that he still had plenty of work ahead. 15 more enemy fighters remained in the area, and he faced a much larger obstacle: a formidable, reinforced blockhouse situated directly in his path toward the summit of the hill. This blockhouse was a sturdy, heavily fortified structure constructed from reinforced concrete faced with volcanic rock, designed to withstand attack. It was located approximately 50 yards uphill and served as a significant obstacle despite the ongoing efforts of artillery, which had so far failed to destroy it fully. Inside its thick walls, at least a dozen Japanese defenders were stationed, armed with rifles and grenades, prepared to defend their position against any assault. The walls themselves were roughly 3 feet of reinforced concrete faced with volcanic stone, making them tough and durable against almost any form of attack. The structure's dimensions measured approximately 12 feet in width and 15 feet in length, forming a compact but highly defensible stronghold blocking the Marines' progress toward the summit. Jacobson, aware of the stakes, prepared himself mentally and physically for the impending challenge. He still had a single rocket remaining, a last chance to breach this heavily fortified position and continue his advance. The blockhouse's strategic location and robust construction meant that it would take a well-placed hit or a sustained attack to bring it down, making each shot critical in the ongoing struggle for control of the hilltop. In the midst of the rugged terrain, a solitary narrow slit, designed for firing, faced downward along the sloped hillside, strategically covering the approach zone with a network of interlocking fields of fire. These fields of fire originated from the machine gun nest that Jacobson's team had just dismantled, eliminating the enemy's defensive positions one by one. During the intense pre-invasion bombardment, Allied naval forces had repeatedly targeted this specific blockhouse, unleashing a relentless barrage of artillery shells. Battleships had fired colossal 16-inch shells, which echoed like thunder across the landscape, while cruisers contributed with 8-inch rounds that pounded the structure relentlessly. Despite these ferocious attacks, the thick concrete walls bore the scars, visible scorch marks and fragments chipped away from the surface. Yet they still stood firm, resilient against the assault. Inside the fortified shelter, Japanese defenders lay in wait, their rifles poised, ready to fire at any intruder who dared approach. Jacobson, equipped with a single M6A3 rocket launcher, a sleek weapon fitted with a shape-charged warhead designed to pierce armor, faced a challenge. Its potent explosive could cut through steel with relative ease, but concrete proved to be a different adversary altogether. The warhead could succeed in punching a hole in the structure, perhaps creating a way inside, but whether this hole would be sufficiently large to neutralize the enemy position remained an open question. The situation called for a different, more creative solution. Moving carefully and cautiously, Jacobson shifted laterally across the slope, keeping a low profile to avoid detection or incoming fire. He observed that the firing slit of the blockhouse faced southwest, a sector that was critical because it directly covered the main avenue of approach used by the Marines. To find an advantage, he contemplated reaching the northern side of the structure, an area devoid of firing slits, hoping it might contain a hidden blind spot, a weakness for the defenders to overlook. The Japanese had meticulously constructed their defenses, assuming that any attack would originate from the beach or the most obvious approaches. They had not anticipated a lone Marine to bother maneuvering around their perimeter from within their own heavily fortified lines, striking from an unexpected flank. Crawling through the volcanic ash and shattered rocks, Jacobson moved steadily, covering roughly 40 yards, his uniform now darkened by dust and debris, blending into the landscape. Behind him, the clatter of his bazooka tube, scraping against stones, echoed softly. Meanwhile, Company I remained pinned down from other positions higher up on Hill 382, intermittently exchanging fire with enemy positions. Despite their efforts, they couldn't advance without risking heavy casualties. Eventually, Jacobson reached the northern face of the blockhouse. This side of the structure had no visible firing slits. It had been cleverly built into the hillside, utilizing the natural slope to add an extra layer of protection. The rear entrance, however, was exposed, a low opening barely 3 feet tall, covered by a simple wooden frame. Recognizing that he couldn't risk firing the rocket directly into the entrance from close range, such an attempt from mere 10 feet would be suicidal. The danger of backblast killing him as surely as the Japanese inside, he set down the bazooka carefully. He still held the loaded rocket, but it wasn't suitable for this direct assault. Instead, he reached for a fragmentation grenade from his belt, an explosive capable of causing chaos inside confined spaces by dispersing shrapnel in all directions. Swiftly, he picked up the bazooka again, creeping to within 15 feet of the wooden frame. Inside, he could hear muffled voices, Japanese soldiers at least 6, possibly more, all gathered in the confined space, unaware of his precise position. Shouldering his launcher, Jacobson aimed carefully at the wooden frame, then fired. The rocket struck the wooden cover and detonated with a deafening blast, exploding the entrance open and causing part of the rear wall to collapse inward. Dust and smoke billowed out, filling the air with chaos. Immediately, Jacobson dropped the bazooka tube and pulled the pin from his grenade, counting silently to 2 before boldly throwing it through the smoky opening. The explosion within the blockhouse was devastating, shattering the interior, causing screams of agony and confusion, then plunging everything into ominous silence. Jacobson waited momentarily in tense anticipation, but nothing remained alive or moving inside. We cautiously circled to the now open firing slit. He peered inside. The scene was one of total destruction. The interior was filled with lifeless bodies and scattered rubble. His quick action had effectively neutralized the fortification. No Japanese soldiers remained alive in that position. 4 targets had gone down, with the remaining 12 still outstanding, their positions unknown but likely hidden elsewhere within the complex. However, victory came at a cost. The rocket supply was now exhausted. His once valuable bazooka was rendered useless without ammunition. He carefully raised his rifle, preparing to withdraw from this perilous position, and began retracing his steps down the slope toward Company I's position. As he moved away, he passed by the bodies of those who had operated the initial bazooka team, an unfortunate group whose fate was intertwined with this confrontation. Jacobson's attention was caught by the canvas bag of the loader, still lying nearby. He checked it, but it was empty, having been looted or abandoned in the chaos of the firefight. Having completed his daring and strategic assault, Jacobson was acutely aware that though he had knocked out a key enemy position, the overall battle was far from over. The remaining Japanese soldiers, concealed within other fortifications, would require continued effort and ingenuity to overcome. But for now, the immediate threat from this particular stronghold had been decisively eliminated. Jacobson cast a long, steady gaze across the desolate expanse of volcanic ash that stretched out before him, stretching for several hundred yards. The landscape was scarred and eerie, the aftermath of relentless bombardment, with the scattering of ash and broken rocks creating a rugged and hostile terrain. Not far behind where his unit, Company I, had launched their initial assault, he could make out the precise location of the supply point, a vital resupply depot amid the chaos of battle. This supply area was visible from his vantage point, nestled behind a low, makeshift wall built from sandbags that served as a rudimentary fortification against enemy fire. Crates filled with ammunition, containers of medical supplies, and boxes of bazooka rockets, all meticulously stacked and guarded, formed a small fortress of essential war materials. However, The entire vicinity was under constant observation from enemy positions perched at a higher elevation, Japanese soldiers stationed strategically to monitor the advancing Allied forces. Intermittent mortar fire had been hammering that area consistently throughout the morning, showering the supply point with fragments and shrapnel from above. The relentless shelling was a grim reminder of how perilous their mission was. Tragically, 3 brave Marines had already fallen while attempting to carry ammunition forward. Heroes whose sacrifice underscored the danger lurking within every step of this brutal campaign. Determined, Jacobson began his cautious movement toward the supply point, adverting to the necessity of stealth and agility. He kept his body low, hugging the ground, and utilizing every natural depression along the terrain. Every dip and hollow, along with clusters of rocks scattered across the landscape to hide his progress from enemy sight. Enemy snipers were lurking, their deadly precision making every move perilous. The crack of a single round whistling past his head was a stark reminder of their watchfulness. A second bullet struck the earth mere feet to his left, causing a spray of dust and ash. Undeterred, Jacobson pressed forward inch by inch, inching closer to his goal. Upon reaching the supply point, he swiftly located a crate marked plainly with the label M6A3 rockets, confirming it contained a dozen rockets snugly packed in individual cardboard tubes, each one ready for use in combat. With quick efficiency, he seized 4 of these rockets, shoving them into the canvas bag he had taken from a fallen loader, a makeshift but vital container for his gear. Suddenly, a mortar round burst roughly 30 yards away, causing a loud, deafening explosion. The shockwave rippled through the air, and fragments of shrapnel whistled overhead, narrowly missing Jacobson as he sprinted away. The explosion's force rattled the ground beneath him, and he instinctively ran back toward the slope, clutching the bazooka tube in one hand and the bag of rockets in the other for better balance and speed. The situation was dire. Company I remained pinned down, still under heavy fire from their vantage atop Hill 382, a strategic high ground overlooking the battlefield. The enemy had responded swiftly, opening fire from a second pillbox, an emplacement smaller than the previous blockhouse but equally deadly in its purpose. This new fortification was manned by a 5-man crew armed with a heavy machine gun and was stationed in a position that commanded a perfect field of fire covering the eastern approach, an area vital for any advancing troops. Jacobson prepared himself for another assault. He loaded a fresh rocket into his bazooka, his muscles taut with anticipation. The target, the second pillbox, was located roughly 90 yards uphill from his position. He quickly found cover behind a cluster of rocks that provided partial protection from enemy fire. Carefully, he began his slow, calculated approach, knowing that the Japanese inside the pillbox had likely seen him obliterate the previous blockhouse. They were well aware of what was coming. Their response was immediate. They opened fire sooner than Jacobson had expected, likely out of panic or suspicion. He was still about 80 yards away when the first burst of machine gun fire sliced through the air, kicking up volcanic ash a full 10 feet to his right. The enemy crew's nerves were frayed, their confidence shaken by the destruction of the blockhouse, making them prone to mistakes under pressure. Seizing the advantage, Jacobson moved with zigzag bursts of quick steps uphill, cleverly utilizing the rugged terrain for cover. The machine gun's barrel tracked him as he moved, firing short, controlled bursts in an attempt to conserve ammunition, an indication of their nervous desperation. Every burst of gunfire gave him just a brief 3 seconds to advance before the next barrage erupted, but he steadily increased his distance, covering 15 yards at a time, then 20, closing in on his target. The machine gun's fire gradually faltered and finally fell silent, surrendering the advantage to him. Reaching a safe position behind a depression in the ground, Jacobson quickly reloaded his bazooka and dove behind the terrain to shield himself from the incoming gunfire. Inside the pillbox, the 5-man crew had realized their position was compromised. They began repositioning their machine gun mount within the confined interior space. With the enemy momentarily distracted, Jacobson aimed his rocket with grim precision. The pillbox was now only 65 yards away, its distinctive concrete silhouette partially embedded in a bed of volcanic rock. The firing slit, a narrow horizontal opening, was designed to allow the defenders a wide field of fire while exposing as little of themselves as possible. However, this narrow opening posed a significant challenge for the defenders. Their limited traverse meant that the machine gun could only swing so far left or right before hitting the reinforced edges of the slit. Jacobson, observing this, moved to the right, forcing the crew inside to readjust their aim. The gun's barrel swung toward him, tracking his movement, but not fast enough to catch him before he continued his approach. He kept moving with deliberate caution, aware that the second he stopped or hesitated, the machine gun would resume fire. As the gun reached its maximum traverse, its widest possible arc, its firing ceased. Inside, the crew was repositioning the gun mount, trying to find a better angle. Seizing this fleeting moment, Jacobson steadied himself, took careful aim, and fired his rocket precisely into the narrow opening. The rocket zipped through the air in less than a second, crossing the distance rapidly and entering the firing slit with deadly intent. Inside, it detonated with a deafening explosion, the shaped charge warhead designed specifically to pierce and destroy reinforced concrete within confined spaces. The blast erupted violently, unleashing a catastrophic chain reaction. The force blew out every opening, every weak point in the pillbox's structure, shattering its walls and rendering it utterly useless to the enemy. The explosion's shockwave and fragmentation spread through the interior, ensuring that the Japanese soldiers within were unable to continue their resistance. In this moment, Jacobson's sharp calculation and courageous maneuver had succeeded in obliterating a strong enemy position, dramatically shifting the momentum in the ongoing battle. Suddenly, a fierce burst of flame and thick smoke erupted violently from the very entrance of the enemy stronghold. The deafening crack of machine guns suddenly fell silent, as if the entire iron beast had been silenced by a single, decisive blow. Jacobson, ever alert and patient, waited patiently in the tense silence that followed. He lingered in anticipation, his eyes carefully scanning the entrance, but nothing stirred within. The eerie stillness seemed to stretch endlessly. Feeling that the moment called for action, he quickly reloaded his weapon and crept forward with utmost caution, every step deliberate and controlled, aware that one careless move could cost him dearly. As he advanced to within approximately 20 yards of the entrance, he was able to discern through the diminishing light into the dark opening. What he saw confirmed that the enemy was no longer a threat there. The five-man crew had been eliminated, their bodies lifeless, sprawled behind their positions. The interior of the enemy's fortification was utterly annihilated. Its walls and defenses lay in ruin, a tangled mess of destruction and debris. On the ground, hundreds of spent cartridges from the machine gun littered the dirt floor, glinting faintly in the weak light, a stark reminder of the fierce firefight that had just transpired. With these 5 enemy combatants neutralized, only 11 remained, the remaining adversaries still lurking and waiting deeper within the complex. Meanwhile, Company I continued its relentless advance. Jacobson watched as small groups of Marines moved steadily up the slope, strategically utilizing newly cleared positions as cover for their progression. Their effort was bearing fruit. Gradually, they advanced closer to the increasingly challenging terrain. However, the landscape ahead was rapidly deteriorating into a treacherous maze. Hill 382's western face had become an intricate labyrinth of jagged volcanic rocks, shattered terrain, and defensive positions skillfully interconnected to form an almost impenetrable barrier. These defenses hadn't been hastily thrown together. They had been meticulously constructed over many months by the Japanese, who had spared no effort to make each approach difficult and dangerous. Every possible route was deliberately covered, every avenue of attack funneled or blocked, forcing assaulting Marines into deadly kill zones where the enemy's fire would be most effective. Jacobson pressed upward, climbing higher and farther ahead, another 50 yards farther still. His keen eyes spotted a well-concealed, earth-covered rifle emplacement, a simple yet effective defensive position. Not quite a pillbox or fortified bunker, but rather a concealed hole dug into the ground, its overhead protection assembled from logs and volcanic rock. Inside, two Japanese riflemen silently fired across the slope toward the advancing Marines below. The crude construction of this improvised position belied its deadly purpose. Artillery shells had failed to destroy it because the earth overhead absorbed the blast, rendering direct bombardments ineffective. Similarly, the angles in construction prevented direct fire from reaching inside, despite the fact that the riflemen had clear and commanding visibility over the entire western slope. Recognizing the threat, Jacobson shifted to flank this position on the left. The imp was angled to cover the downslope approach, leaving the defenders unaware of his movement. Once he reached a point about 40 yards away, slightly above the imp, he swiftly loaded a rocket. Aiming carefully downward at the earth and logs overhead, he fired the explosive charge. The rocket struck the protection and exploded inside, detonating and collapsing the entire imp position in a roaring blast. The firing ceased instantaneously. They had been silenced. With this victory, another 6 enemies lay dead in the dirt, leaving only 10 remaining ahead. Yet, despite these successes, Jacobson now faced the most perilous segment of Hill 382. Just beyond, in a semicircular formation around the upper section of the hill's summit approach, there existed a series of 6 interconnected defensive positions, each one intricately linked to the others and designed as a final, deadly killing ground. These formidable defenses comprised interconnected rifle pits, heavily fortified machine gun nests, mortar emplacements, and overlapping fields of fire, all carefully placed to cover every possible approach. The Japanese defenders had spent months meticulously setting these up, transforming them into a continuous, overlapping web of lethal obstacles that even the most determined assault would find challenging to breach. This ring of defenses represented the last line of resistance, an almost impenetrable barrier that would effectively stop any enemy force that managed to overcome the lower, less fortified positions. The 23rd Marines had already attempted to assault this final stronghold twice before, and both efforts had resulted in devastating failure, with heavy casualties inflicted on their ranks. Now, with only 3 rockets remaining and 10 enemies still to eliminate, Jacobson faced a critical dilemma. The mathematics were painfully clear. He would exhaust his limited supplies before he could neutralize all these positions. To continue his assault, he needed more rockets, more firepower from the supply point, now located approximately 300 yards behind him. But the route back was fraught with danger. It was clearly visible from the summit, exposed to Japanese observation and fire. Mortar crews had already taken note of the most obvious paths leading to the supply cache, honing in their fire from hidden positions above. Snipers concealed within the terrain had their sights trained on the open ground, and the defenses in the 6-position cluster, those deadly interconnected bunkers and trenches, had to be aware that Jacobson was still in the vicinity, likely waiting for him to attempt a retreat. Recognizing that a direct route back was too perilous, Jacobson began to move cautiously downhill, sticking to the depression lines that crisscrossed the terrain, avoiding exposed ridges and open slopes. As he descended, a mortar round suddenly exploded approximately 50 yards to his left, then another burst followed, closer and more dangerous, forcing him to slow his pace and remain alert amid the tense silence of the battlefield. The Japanese forces had effectively surrounded him on all sides, creating a tense and dangerous pinch point that made escape or retreat nearly impossible. They had strategically placed him in a narrowing zone where their coordinated attacks could concentrate pressure from multiple directions, gradually squeezing the air out of his options. The next phase of their tactical maneuver involved them carefully setting the stage for what would be their next assault, anticipating his movements during the upcoming engagement. Their artillery crews, aware of the urgency, had begun adjusting their targeting, and the range-finding equipment was now calculating the optimal distance to land their shells precisely where they intended, ensuring that the ensuing barrage would catch him at a disadvantage. It was clear that the next round of shelling would be calibrated to locate him exactly, pressing for a pinpoint hit with deadly precision. Meanwhile, he seized the moment to act swiftly. With his heart pounding in his chest, he sprinted the final 100 yards to reach a vital supply point, risking everything in a swift dash across perilous terrain. His hands grasped quickly for another 4 rockets, chewing into his limited ammunition stockpile, knowing that every second counted. Suddenly, a mortar round impacted startlingly close, only about 20 yards away from his position, causing a deafening explosion. The force of the blast sent shrapnel screaming overhead like deadly projectiles slicing through the air at supersonic speeds. He instinctively threw himself flat onto the ground to minimize his exposure, feeling the shockwave reverberate through his body as a second mortar shell detonated even nearer. The noise was deafening, and the shrapnel whistled past him with terrifying velocity. Despite the chaos, he scrambled to his feet and ran uphill again, now carrying a heavy load, almost 70 pounds of weapons, ammunition, and vital supplies. The weight was burdensome but necessary. The terrain was heavily contested, with Japanese mortars walking across the slope, trying to pin him down with a relentless barrage. In the thick of this chaos, Jacobson reached a cluster of 6 defensive positions at exactly 10:30 in the morning. His entire body was soaked with sweat, despite the briskness of the cool February air, which did little to soothe his exertion and tension. His ears continued ringing from the repeated, nearly deafening back blast of his bazooka, an assault weapon that had become both his shield and his torment. His shoulder throbbed painfully from the recoil of firing the launcher multiple times, a constant reminder of the toll of sustained combat. He surveyed the configuration of the 6 positions, knowing he had only 4 rockets remaining and 6 targets in front of him. He understood deeply that he would have to choose wisely, making split-second decisions that could determine whether he could weaken the enemy's defenses or be forced into a retreat. The positions formed a roughly 60-yard arc along the slope, designed by the Japanese to support one another in mutual defense. Their layout was deliberate. If he attacked the leftmost position, the neighboring ones would have clear shots at him, creating a deadly crossfire. Approaching from the middle would ensure that all 6 could fire simultaneously, trapping him in a deadly gauntlet. Each position was spaced approximately 15 to 20 yards apart, close enough for the defenders to lob mutual support fire, yet far enough apart to prevent a single rocket from destroying multiple positions at once. Jacobson meticulously studied the layout, noting the specific characteristics of each defensive point. The rightmost position was a simple rifle pit manned by 2 Japanese soldiers, likely tasked with basic defensive duties. Next to it was a machine gun nest, cleverly concealed behind jagged volcanic rocks, offering a strategic vantage point for suppressive fire. The 3rd and 4th positions were mortar emplacements, built to deliver indirect fire from protected vantage points. The 5th was again a rifle pit, smaller but still significant. The 6th position was an especially reinforced observation post, one with a clear, unobstructed view stretching across the entire western slope, making it a critical point to neutralize early. Having carefully analyzed these points, Jacobson made his decisive choice. His plan was to target the observation post first, knowing that its destruction would deprive the other positions of vital visual support. Without spotters, the remaining Japanese defenses would be fighting blindly, without accurate intelligence on his movements or location. He moved cautiously and deliberately, veering to the far right side of the defensive perimeter to bypass the more heavily fortified positions and avoid detection. The terrain was treacherous, scattered with jagged volcanic rocks that tore at his uniform and slowed his advance. Every step had to be carefully coordinated to avoid giving away his presence. As he advanced, he kept his senses alert for movement and sound. The defenders in the nearby positions were concentrated on the slope ahead, their rifles trained on the main route of the advancing Marine force. They hadn't anticipated an attack coming from the flank, which gave Jacobson a crucial element of surprise. Reaching a point about 70 yards from the observation post, he quickly prepared his weapon, loading one of his rockets, shouldering the launcher firmly, and firing with precision. The missile struck the reinforced wall of the observation post, causing a brutal explosion that detonated with a thunderous blast. The force of the explosion caused one side of the structure to collapse inward, reducing its integrity to rubble. Almost immediately, Jacobson reloaded and launched a second rocket into the smoking ruins. The destructive force tore through the remaining defenses of the post, turning it into a pile of debris. Out stumbled two Japanese soldiers, wounded and disoriented, trying desperately to regain their footing. Before they could reposition, Marine riflemen from Company I, now advancing up the slope with increased vigor, quickly shot both of them down, ensuring no further threat remained from the destroyed observation post. Without hesitation, Jacobson did not linger to witness the aftermath. He knew he had to press forward swiftly. His next target was the rifle pit just 50 yards away, manned by two Japanese soldiers armed with Arisaka rifles. They had been watching the explosion of the observation post, their eyes now searching for the source of the attack, scanning the flanks for movement. Jacobson was closing in, about 40 yards from them, when one of the soldiers caught sight of him and raised his rifle in alarm. Recognizing the imminent threat, Jacobson dove behind whatever cover was available, just in time to escape the deadly crack of the rifle shot passing overhead. He was now down to only 2 rockets, and 5 targets remained unneutralized. With limited ammunition and time running out, he understood that wasting his rockets on a 2-man rifle pit was not a practical option. Instead, he reached for a fragmentation grenade from his belt, carefully waiting 3 seconds, a split second that felt like an eternity, before standing and hurling the explosive with all his strength toward the enemy position. He knew that this would be his best chance to eliminate those 2 soldiers quickly and efficiently, breaking their line and opening the path to the next objective. Every decision, every movement was now crucial, as the outcome of this critical moment would greatly influence the success of his mission amidst the chaos and deadly precision of combat. The grenade soared swiftly through the air, executing a precise arc before landing directly into the open rifle pit below. An immediate, deafening explosion erupted upon detonation, annihilating both defenders who had been occupying that cramped trench. In the chaos of battle, 4 rockets had already been expended, and 2 hand grenades had been used in the frantic effort to hold the position. To this point, 8 emplacements had been destroyed, but there remained 8 more to go in their task. The remaining 4 positions clustered nearby responded swiftly, opening fire with fierce determination. The relentless bark of machine gun rounds cut through the tense air around Jacobson, whistling past him and forcing him to seek temporary cover. Meanwhile, mortar crews were busy adjusting their aiming sights, their crews leaning over their tubes, calculating trajectories for the incoming strikes. He could distinctly hear the sharp, rhythmic thumps of mortar rounds leaving their tubes, each one promising an imminent impact. With perhaps only 10 seconds before the shells descended, Jacobson made a quick decision and ran to his left, away from his last known position, seeking safety. Moments later, the mortar shells struck precisely where he had been standing moments before, sending a blast of shrapnel and twisted debris whistling through the air. Hearing the shrill scream of metal fragments slicing through space, he kept moving, instinctively seeking cover behind a low ridge composed of jagged volcanic rocks, offering some protection from the barrage. The enemy machine gun nest in the second position had locked onto his movement, tracking him with deadly precision. Its well-trained gunner fired short, disciplined bursts, keeping the weapon trained on Jacobson with controlled, practiced aim. The gunner's skill was evident. Each burst precise, each shot designed to keep him pinned down without wasting ammunition. For a moment, Jacobson could do nothing but wait as the gun fired, counting the individual rounds in the burst. 5 shots were fired in rapid succession. This indicated the gunner was deliberately conserving his ammunition, perhaps to ensure prolonged suppressive fire. During this brief pause, Jacobson summoned his resolve, quickly raising his weapon, aiming carefully, and firing his third to last rocket directly at the enemy position. The missile struck the edge of a depression in the slope where the machine gun nest was concealed. An enormous explosion erupted, shrouding the area in fire and smoke. The blast was so powerful that the entire gun emplacement was obliterated, its structure torn apart and thrown into chaos. The machine gun fell silent, silence replacing the earlier din of gunfire. Jacobson couldn't immediately tell whether he had destroyed the nest entirely or merely suppressed it, rendering it temporarily unusable without full destruction. Without hesitation, he swiftly reloaded his weapon. At that moment, a Japanese soldier emerged from the smoking wreckage of the machine gun nest, running frantically toward the next nearby rifle pit in an attempt to reposition. Without hesitation, Jacobson took quick aim with his rifle and fired, hitting the soldier. He saw the soldier collapse, falling to the ground, his body struck down in the chaos of battle. Only 2 rockets remained in his possession. Crucial, limited ammunition for the critical moments ahead. 3 enemy positions still stood within the cluster of defenses, 2 mortar pits and 1 remaining rifle pit. His immediate priority lay with the mortar crews, whose rounds continued to drop strategically on Company I's positions, preventing the Marines from advancing forward, effectively stalling the assault. With resolve firm in his mind, Jacobson moved uphill, angling his approach toward the first mortar position, which was approximately 60 yards away. As he drew closer, he saw that the mortar crew was busy reloading, unaware of his presence. He mustered his strength, shouldered the bazooka, and took aim. Without hesitation, he fired the rocket, striking the mortar pit directly in the center of its structure. The resulting explosion was colossal, unleashing a wave of destructive fire that obliterated the entire mortar emplacement. The blast was so powerful that the mortar tube was exposed to the air, flipping end over end before crashing back down 30 yards away. The 2 men operating the mortar crew were instantly killed in the inferno, their bodies shattered by the force. The blast also tore the mortar's base plate loose from the ground, scattering debris and rubble in all directions. With this decisive strike, 12 enemy positions had now been destroyed. However, the rifle pit still remained. Its occupants, 3 Japanese soldiers, spotting Jacobson as he approached. They responded quickly and accurately, opening fire with their Arisaka rifles, the sharp cracks of gunfire echoing past his head in rapid succession. Round after round whistled dangerously close as he instinctively dropped the empty bazooka tube and quickly reached for his rifle, slung across his shoulder. He unslung his M1 Garand, which had 8 rounds left in its clip, and took careful aim at the enemy soldiers. At approximately 40 yards, he fired, hitting the first soldier who was rendered instantly unconscious and collapsing in the trench. Without hesitation, he fired again, causing the second soldier to stumble backward into the pit, wounded but still alive, yet vulnerable in the chaos of ongoing combat. The third soldier made an earnest attempt to climb out of his position and break into a swift run toward safety, hoping to escape the chaos and danger that surrounded him. Before he could get far, Jacobson, with calm precision, took aim and fired, striking the fleeing soldier in the back, effectively stopping his movement and ending his effort to retreat. The cluster of 6 enemy positions, which had been fiercely resisting their advance, was decisively obliterated in that moment, eliminating a critical segment of the enemy's defensive network. Since the early hours of 9 o'clock in the morning, a total of 13 enemy strongholds had been systematically neutralized, dismantled, or rendered useless by their efforts. This relentless assault had opened up a clear and unobstructed route to the summit of Hill 382, making it accessible for the advancing forces. With the path now clear, Company I, keen to press forward and capitalize on the victories so far, began their steady push past the positions that Jacobson and his comrades had skillfully cleared earlier. These Marines advanced in small, tactical groups, each member alert and poised, their weapons at the ready, continually on the lookout for any renewed resistance from the enemy. The Japanese defensive line, which had previously posed a significant obstacle, had effectively been broken, its anchored positions dismantled by precise and relentless fire. Because of these successes, the remaining Japanese defenders higher up the slope, who once had a foothold on the hill, found themselves now increasingly isolated and cut off from support. Continuing his observation from his vantage point, Jacobson looked down the slope, scanning the terrain ahead with deliberate focus. To his left, across a shallow and rough ravine, he spotted another company of Marines who, unfortunately, were pinned down and unable to move forward. He could see them crouched behind a scattering of rocks, their bodies pressed low in an effort to minimize exposure, as they took punishing amounts of fire from a position that was hidden from his line of sight. This fire was intense and relentless, stemming from a well-fortified enemy position that the Marines could not directly see from their position. These Marines belonged to the 24th Marine Regiment, assigned temporarily to assist the larger 23rd Regiment in their assault. Their mission was to advance along the eastern approach to the mountain, but for reasons unclear, they had come to a halt about 200 yards from the summit, unable to push any further. Despite Jacobson's efforts, he had exhausted his supply of bazooka rockets. No more rounds remained in his weapon. However, his trained eyes understood exactly what was preventing their progress: an enemy stronghold, specifically a pillbox, a heavily fortified concrete and volcanic rock construction built directly into the hillside, which overlooked the eastern approach. Its firing slit was positioned so directly facing downward into the ravine that any Marine attempting to cross the open ground would be exposed to a deadly hail of gunfire. Realizing the threat this pillbox posed, Jacobson carefully picked up the empty tube of his bazooka and gathered his strength before beginning to move downhill once again toward the supply point. His legs ached from the strain of the ascent and descent, and his shoulder throbbed painfully from the repeated recoil of his empty launcher. He had been fighting for nearly 2 hours by this point, fighting without water, without relief, in a hostile environment that drained his strength. As he moved, he saw that the supply point had been repositioned closer to the front lines, as Marines had carried ammunition crates uphill in a determined effort to sustain their push. Reaching this new supply position behind a cluster of rocks about 70 yards further down the slope, Jacobson located another supply of M6A3 rockets. He carefully loaded 4 more into his canvas bag, prepared for the next phase of his attack. With his weapons replenished, he then turned his attention toward the pinned-down company across the ravine. Navigating the exposed terrain was perilous. The open ground left him vulnerable to enemy snipers still lurking and waiting for an opportunity to take a shot. From his right, he could hear the faint crack of a sniper round striking volcanic ash just 2 feet to his right side. Another round cracked loudly overhead, reminding him of the constant danger he faced. Finally, he arrived near the Marine Company's position. A commanding officer, a captain, saw him approaching with a bazooka in hand and quickly indicated a target uphill, specifically the enemy pillbox. Jacobson nodded in acknowledgement, having already identified the enemy stronghold from his vantage point. The target was situated roughly 80 yards away and stood elevated about 15 feet above the level of the ravine floor, giving the defending crew a clear advantage. The cupola of the pillbox had an optimal field of fire, allowing them to observe and shoot along the eastern approach with deadly precision. The concrete structure showed no signs of damage from the naval bombardments that had rained down earlier, and the firing slit was positioned strategically to cover every potential approach route, effectively turning the pillbox into an impregnable vantage point. Quietly, Jacobson moved to the right, carefully working his way along the edge of the ravine to approach the pillbox from a more advantageous angle. The crew inside was focused on engaging the Marines directly beneath their position, firing steady bursts from what was probably a Type 92 heavy machine gun, a weapon capable of firing at 7.7 millimeters, with a rate of about 600 rounds per minute and an effective range of up to 800 meters. At this mind-boggling distance, such a weapon was devastating, capable of mowing down anything in its line of fire. Jacobson continued his ascent, climbing higher and utilizing natural terrain features, including dead ground, to mask his movement and avoid detection. The crew inside the pillbox, aware of the easy targets directly beneath their position, could not depress their gun low enough to engage targets on the ground under them. Jacobson exploited this blind spot, moving through terrain out of their line of sight and fire, gradually closing in on his target with careful, calculated steps. His movements were slow and deliberate, designed to avoid the deadly precision of the enemy's well-positioned defenses, while positioning himself for the critical shot needed to neutralize the pillbox and weaken the enemy's hold on this vital part of the hill. He found himself approaching a strategic position approximately 50 yards away from the enemy fortification, notably situated just a few feet below its top level, giving him a slight advantage in perspective. Carefully, he loaded a rocket into his weapon, preparing for a precise strike. The task was far from simple because of the challenging angle he had to aim at. Firing upward from below limited both the effective range and the accuracy of his attack. Despite this difficulty, he kept his eyes fixed on a specific target, the narrow slit of the pillbox, which was visible through the opening. This opening was roughly 3 feet wide and about 18 inches tall. If he could manage to propel a rocket through this narrow aperture, the shaped charge contained within would detonate inside the pillbox, causing devastating damage to its interior and any occupants or equipment within. He took a moment to carefully aim, making compensations for the upward trajectory that would otherwise throw off his shot. Firing when ready, he released the rocket, which swiftly climbed into the air. Its trajectory was aimed carefully at the concrete structure, and it struck 2 feet above the slit, hitting the wall directly. The explosion was immediate and intense. Chunks of concrete and debris were scattered in all directions, showering down on the surroundings. Despite the impact, the pillbox remained standing, its reinforced walls holding firm against the attack. Meanwhile, the machine gun mounted on top kept firing, unleashing a barrage of bullets in an attempt to suppress or damage anything within its line of fire. Without hesitation, Jacobson quickly reloaded his weapon, adjusting his aim downward to compensate for the previous shot's trajectory, and fired again. This time, the rocket penetrated the narrow slit directly and exploded inside the confines of the pillbox. Flames and thick smoke burst out of every opening in the structure, signaling that the interior had been hit and compromised. The machine gun inside the pillbox fell silent, its rapid fire silenced by the internal destruction. The position was effectively neutralized, eradicated in this single attack. Having successfully taken down one more fortification, he noted there were still 14 similar enemy positions remaining. Only 2 of these were left to be subdued before their objective could be considered overall achieved. Meanwhile, the Marine Company position below, which had been coordinating their assault, began pushing forward swiftly. They took advantage of the sudden silence resulting from the destruction of the pillbox, moving rapidly to capitalize on the momentary weakness. Within just a few minutes, they had crossed the ravine and were steadily climbing toward the summit of the hill, progressing with determination and focus. However, amidst this seemingly smooth advance, Jacobson suddenly perceived a sound that froze him in place, an unfamiliar, ominous noise that none of the previous explosions or gunfire had produced. It was a mechanical, grinding sound, distinct and unmistakable, reminiscent of the harsh, relentless noise of heavy machinery in motion. He identified it immediately, the sound of treads moving over volcanic rock beneath a moving vehicle, likely an armored tank. His alertness sharpened as he recognized the direction of the sound. Coming from the eastern slope at the base of Hill 382, a Japanese tank was on the move. The tank was a Type 95 Hago, a lightweight assault vehicle designed for mobility and quick maneuvers. It weighed approximately 7 tons and was powered by a diesel engine. Its main armament consisted of a modest 37mm gun, complemented by 2 machine guns of the same caliber, Type 97, mounted on the front. The crew was a small team of 3 men, all trained to operate the vehicle efficiently in combat situations. Historically, Japanese forces utilized such tanks as mobile pillboxes, placing them in crevices, depressions, and hidden positions in the terrain where the superior naval artillery of the American fleet could not reach them. This particular tank was making its way up the eastern part of the slope, grinding through coarse volcanic ash at a speed of approximately 8 kilometers per hour. Its turret was rotating from side to side as the crew searched for targets, seeking opportunities to engage the advancing Marines below. From his vantage point about 70 yards away, Jacobson observed the scene carefully. The tank was positioned beneath him, slowly making its way up a shallow draw that led directly toward the summit they were all aiming to attain. Behind the tank, he could see the Marine company he had just assisted, advancing in the open terrain, unaware of the imminent threat looming from the approaching machine. Its turret suddenly stopped moving, and the main gun, a 37mm piece, was elevated in preparation to fire. Jacobson instinctively reached for his rocket launcher, realizing the vulnerability of this lightly armored vehicle. The armor of the Hago was quite thin, roughly 14 millimeters on the front, just 12 millimeters on the sides, and a mere 6 millimeters on the top. To put this into perspective, the shaped charge contained within his M6A3 rocket could penetrate up to 100 millimeters of steel if necessary. This meant that, from any angle, the tank was highly vulnerable to a well-placed explosive. Despite its light armor, tanks such as the Hago remained formidable threats due to their mobility and the trained crews operating them under fire. If Jacobson missed a shot or failed to disable the tank, it could easily turn its guns on him and the advancing Marines, posing a deadly danger. He carefully aimed at the open turret hatch, within which the tank's commander was visible, an individual scanning the horizon, on the lookout for targets. Jacobson steadied his stance, took a deep breath, and fired his rocket. The projectile soared through the air and struck the left side of the tank's turret, detonating with a deafening explosion. The shaped charge penetrated the thin armor, igniting a fiery blast inside the turret mechanism, causing it to jam. Smoke billowed out from the hatch as the crew inside scrambled to respond. The tank's engine, however, still continued to run, and the vehicle's gun remained immobile, unable to traverse its turret, but still capable of firing from its fixed position. Although the tank was damaged and rendered vulnerable to further attack, it was not completely destroyed, and its main armaments remained operational for the moment. One of the machine guns mounted on the tank's front, still fully functional, opened fire in response, unleashing a rapid spray of rounds that swept across the slope below. Marines near Jacobson instinctively ducked or dove for cover to avoid the hail of bullets. Calmly, Jacobson reloaded his weapon once again, preparing for what could be a prolonged and fierce engagement against this unexpected adversary, knowing that the fight was far from over and that quick, precise action could make the difference between success and failure on this critical battlefield. The tank was desperately attempting to reverse its direction, inching backwards carefully along the narrow draw in an effort to escape the pursuing enemy. Its movement was cautious yet frantic, as the crew inside realized the peril that threatened them. Unfortunately for the tank's driver, his field of vision was severely limited. The damage sustained by the turret obstructed his view of the slope ahead, leaving him unaware of the exact position of the enemy combatant lurking nearby. The turret, now compromised and badly damaged, blocked any line of sight, rendering him unable to assess the threat coming from the hillside. Meanwhile, Jacobson was maneuvering strategically on foot, moving stealthily to the left side of the retreating tank, effectively flanking it on its less protected flank. He advanced carefully across the terrain, closing the distance gradually until he reached a position approximately 60 yards away from the tank. From this vantage point, he had a clear shot at the critical rear of the vehicle, focusing on the delicate engine compartment, which was particularly vulnerable due to its relatively thin armor. Specifically, the armor in this section was only about 6 millimeters thick, a mere sliver of metal compared to the other stronger parts of the tank. With calculated precision, Jacobson took aim, calmly pulled the trigger, and released a rocket. The projectile zipped through the air and struck the engine deck of the tank, piercing its metal surface. The impact was immediate and violent. A powerful explosion erupted almost instantaneously, followed by a fierce fire, as the diesel fuel stored within the tank ignited with ferocious intensity. Flames shot outward from the engine compartment, quickly spreading into the crew area through the gaping damage inflicted on the turret. As the inferno raged, 2 Japanese crew members, caught inside and overwhelmed by the blaze, made a desperate attempt to escape. Their uniforms quickly ignited, and they jumped out of the burning vehicle, their figures silhouetted against the billowing smoke. Without hesitation, and with lethal resolve, the advancing Marine riflemen opened fire, shooting both of the fleeing soldiers before they could reach safety. The tank was consumed by flames, transforming into a blazing wreck that was now a smoky column rising ominously into the morning sky. In the aftermath of the destruction, it was evident that 15 enemy positions had already been neutralized, eliminated by the relentless efforts of the soldiers. Only one more remained standing, the final obstacle before complete control of the area. Jacobson, now running low on ammunition for his rocket launcher, was aware that he had only one more rocket left in his possession. His gaze shifted uphill towards the summit of Hill 382, where the last Japanese stronghold was now visible. This final bastion was a formidable structure, a substantial blockhouse larger than any previously encountered. Its thick concrete walls stood proudly atop the ridge, fortified with multiple firing slits strategically placed to give the defenders maximum coverage of their surroundings. The sheer size and construction of this building made it a dominant feature on the terrain, commanding the approach to the summit. The Japanese defenders had clearly designed it to withstand direct assaults, even from powerful naval bombardments. If Jacobson could manage to destroy this last stronghold, the strategic position of Hill 382 would be in the American hands, marking a significant victory in the campaign. Resolving to do everything possible to achieve this, he began to climb the steep slope, an arduous ascent made even more difficult by the terrain's volcanic ash. The loose volcanic material shifted under his boots, making each step uncertain and demanding. He was visibly exhausted from the relentless 2 hours of continuous combat, which had pushed him to the limits of his endurance. His gear alone, to include his rifle, grenades, and other equipment, weighed about 67 pounds, adding to his fatigue. During this entire time, he had had no access to water, no opportunity to rest or catch his breath, steadfastly pressing forward with singular focus. Behind him, the remainder of his unit, company along with attached Marines from the 24th Marine Regiment, was also pushing forward, advancing together in a coordinated effort. They had now linked up at the edge of a ravine, their combined strength approximating 80 men. An imposing force that, once the last remaining Japanese resistance was broken, could swiftly seize control of the summit. The teamwork and combined firepower of these units were essential for the final push against the last formidable obstacle. Finally, Jacobson reached a position roughly 40 yards from a blockhouse, his vantage point close enough to observe the enemy within. Through the narrow firing slits, he could see at least 6 Japanese soldiers moving inside, possibly more, armed with rifles, grenades, and fully aware of the imminent threat against their defenses. These defenders had constructed the structure to endure the most powerful assaults, even withstood direct hits from battleships' 16-inch guns, which had failed to destroy it outright. The walls, nearly 4 feet thick, were made of reinforced concrete mixed with volcanic rock, making penetration extremely difficult. The roof of the blockhouse was layered with additional earth and stones, creating an imposing barrier that added to its resilience. From Jacobson's position, it was clear that a direct missile strike or an artillery round would have a very limited chance of knocking it out, given its formidable design. He was faced with a harrowing dilemma. His single remaining rocket was a valuable asset, but the narrow firing slits made it unlikely to succeed unless he found a way to strike the structure accurately. If he missed, the rocket would instead detonate against the exterior wall, causing only superficial damage. Such an explosion might weaken the structure slightly, but it would not neutralize it entirely, and the Japanese inside would likely kill him before he could reload or try again. Realizing that a straightforward attack was too risky, Jacobson decided to circle around the terrain, moving toward the rear of the blockhouse. He carefully shifted right, sidestepping over exposed ground that offered limited cover. He knew that within the building, the defenders could see him through the narrow firing slits. If they were alert enough to spot his movement, they could open fire at any moment. His intuition was confirmed as bullets cracked past him and ricocheted off nearby rocks. He quickly took cover behind a cluster of boulders and debris, catching his breath while assessing his new approach. From this covert position, he gained a better view of the rear entrance, a reinforced door made of steel, set within a sturdy frame, with wooden panels reinforced for additional protection. The door faced away from the primary route of the American advance, which had been expected to attack from the front. The Japanese defenders had not anticipated anyone reaching around to this side of their defenses, making it the perfect weak point to exploit. Full of resolve, Jacobson loaded his final rocket, carefully aiming it at the reinforced steel door. He took a deep breath, steadied his hand, and fired. The rocket struck the steel frame with a resonant explosion, detonating immediately. The force of the blast was immense. The door was blown inward, splinters and debris flying in all directions. The explosion caused the entrance to collapse partially, creating chaos and covering the defenders behind in smoke and dust, effectively blocking their line of sight and access. This daring maneuver marked a crucial step in the fight to take the last Japanese position, inching the Allied forces closer to victory and the eventual control of Hill 382. Private First Class Douglas Jacobson's daring and relentless assault on Hill 382 on the island of Eniwetok during World War II epitomizes courage, resilience, and unwavering determination in the face of overwhelming odds. As the fierce battle raged, Jacobson found himself in a critical moment, clutching a bazooka tube that had been rendered useless in the chaos, and swiftly dropping it aside. Instinctively, he reached for his trusted M1 Garand rifle, a standard issue, but vital weapon that could turn the tide at close quarters. In a split second, he also grabbed 2 grenades from his belt, knowing that immediate action was essential to break through the enemy's defenses and clear a path for his comrades. Without hesitation, he stormed the smoke-filled, debris-littered entrance of the fortified Japanese position, charging forward with a fierce determination that defied fear. With incredible precision and bravery, Jacobson hurled the first grenade through the wreckage-strewn doorway. Its explosion reverberated deafeningly within the blockhouse, ripping through the interior and causing chaos among the defending Japanese soldiers. Without pausing, he followed up with a second grenade, which detonated shortly after, further destabilizing the enemy. Seizing the moment, he entered the structure with his rifle at the ready, prepared to face whatever dangers lay inside. The interior of the blockhouse was a scene of utter disorder. Thick smoke billowed, debris cluttered the floor, and wounded Japanese soldiers, hurt and disoriented from the grenade blasts, lay scattered across the confined space. Jacobson's rifle erupted into fire, each shot bringing destruction to the defenders and clearing the way as he systematically engaged the enemy, room by room. The combat was intense and unrelenting, often close enough to be considered hand-to-hand, with enemy soldiers fighting desperately to hold their ground amid the chaos. At some moments, the fighting reached such brutality that grappling, stabbing, and physical violence became inevitable. During this fierce exchange, Jacobson's M1 Garand magazine was exhausted, but he did not falter. Recognizing the need to continue, he swiftly drew his pistol, a small but vital backup weapon, and pressed on, moving relentlessly through the occupied space. Within just 2 minutes, the once strong Japanese defenses in this particular blockhouse had been shattered. Silence fell over the position, marking the end of a brutal and destructive engagement. The overall toll was staggering. 16 Japanese positions within the blockhouse complex had been destroyed, with 75 defending soldiers killed, an immense loss for the enemy. The fight had begun at 9 o'clock in the morning and lasted until 9:30, a relentless 30-minute battle of fierce combat. Following this initial assault, Jacobson and his fellow Marines spent the next hour and a half methodically clearing remaining enemy positions higher up the slope, ensuring the complete domination of Hill 382. This young Marine, Private First Class Douglas Jacobson, who was only 19 years old at the time, had succeeded in breaking the formidable Japanese defensive line that stretched across Hill 382 in Eniwetok. His actions created a critical breakthrough, and behind him, Company I quickly reached the summit of the hill, pouring through the narrow gap that Jacobson had opened. The strategic significance of this victory was enormous, as by midday, the entire company had firmly established control of the high ground, and by 1 o'clock in the afternoon, they had started the arduous task of clearing enemy positions on the reverse slope. Hill 382, which served as a vital keystone of the Japanese defenses across Eniwetok, had fallen into American hands. Despite the undeniable success, the cost of victory was steep. Company I had suffered the loss of 43 men who were either killed or wounded in this fierce fighting. Overall, since arriving on the island on February the 19th, the 23rd Marine Regiment had endured casualties amounting to 50% of its forces, a staggering toll. Yet, the capture of Hill 382 was a turning point, securing American control over a critical piece of strategic terrain. As the day wore on, Jacobson slowly descended the slope at exactly 2 o'clock in the afternoon. His uniform was torn and soaked with sweat, dirt, and volcanic dust, his face smeared with grime and residual powder from the intense firefight. In his hand, he carried the empty bazooka tube, a symbol of the violent struggle he had just participated in. A Navy corpsman approached cautiously, checking him for wounds. After a brief inspection, he found only minor cuts and bruises, along with severe dehydration, a testament to the brutal conditions, but no serious injuries. Someone nearby, witnessing his exhaustion and resilience, asked him how he had managed to accomplish such a remarkable feat. Jacobson, with an exhausted but humble expression, admitted that he simply did not know. His main focus had been on one overwhelming goal: getting off that hill alive and victorious. The fierce battle on Eniwetok continued for another 3 weeks, with countless skirmishes and hard-fought engagements. Ultimately, the island was declared secured only on March the 16th. The overall toll on American forces was profound. A total of 6,821 Marines had lost their lives, and 17,000 had been wounded in action. Among the 21,000 Japanese defenders, only 216 surrendered, having fought desperately to the very end. This epic struggle earned the medals and recognition of many brave servicemen. In total, 27 Marines and sailors who fought on Eniwetok were awarded the Medal of Honor, the United States' highest and most prestigious award for valor, a number greater than for any other single battle in American history. The heroism displayed by Jacobson was publicly acknowledged, and in April of the same year, he was promoted from private first class to corporal. Later that year, in September, he returned to the United States and reported to Headquarters Marine Corps in Washington, D.C., where his extraordinary actions continued to be recognized. On the 5th of October, President Harry Truman personally awarded him the Medal of Honor during a formal ceremony held at the White House, a moment of immense pride not only for Jacobson, but also for the nation. Coinciding with Jacobson's recognition was Jacqueline Lucas, then the youngest Medal of Honor recipient from Eniwetok, who received his medal on the same day. Jacobson's military journey did not end there. He was officially discharged from active duty in December of 1945. However, his desire to serve remained, leading him to re-enlist in April of the following year. His career advanced further when he attended Officer Candidate School at Quantico, a premier military training facility. In March of 1954, he was commissioned as a second lieutenant, paving the way for deployments to Japan, Okinawa, China, and Vietnam. During this extensive military service, an incident emerged that drew some humorous but revealing attention. His commanding officer learned that Jacobson was the only officer in the Marine Corps who did not possess a high school diploma. Prompted by this, Jacobson took the General Educational Development Exam, passed successfully, and received his high school diploma in 1967. After dedicating more than 2 decades to service, he retired with the rank of major. His life's journey reflected a path marked by extraordinary bravery, continuous growth, and unwavering commitment to his country. In the course of his life, Douglas Jacobson made several significant moves that shaped his journey and legacy. He eventually relocated to the state of New Jersey, where he dedicated himself to working professionally as a real estate agent, engaging with clients and navigating the complexities of property transactions in a bustling environment. During this period, he also found personal happiness through marriage, tying the knot with a woman who was a dedicated educator and teacher he had met many miles away in the distant and peaceful island of Okinawa. Later, in the year 1987, Douglas made the deliberate decision to shift his life once again, this time moving to the warmer and more humid climate of Florida, seeking new opportunities and a different lifestyle in the Sunshine State. Throughout his life, he was known to rarely dwell on the wartime experiences he endured during his earlier years, choosing instead to remain reticent about those difficult moments unless specifically prompted by questions or curiosity from others. Douglas Jacobson's life came to a close on the 20th day of August in the year 2000, when he passed away in Port Charlotte, a city located in the southwestern part of Florida. His death was caused by complications from congestive heart failure, a condition where the heart's ability to pump blood efficiently diminishes, and pneumonia, an infection that inflamed his lungs. At the time of his passing, he was 74 years old, having lived a life full of both ordinary days and extraordinary moments. He was laid to rest in the distinguished Arlington National Cemetery, a solemn resting place reserved for those who have served their country with honor and valor. His contributions and sacrifices did not go unnoticed, and in recognition of his service, the state of Florida chose to honor his memory in a particularly meaningful way. A veterans' nursing home, designed to serve those who have donned the uniform and courageously defended their nation, was named in his honor, the Douglas T. Jacobson State Veterans Nursing Home, located in Port Charlotte. Today, this facility continues its mission of caring for and supporting veterans, many of whom walk a path similar to that which Douglas himself once trod, ensuring his legacy endures through their well-being and comfort. Reflecting on the intense and defining moments of his military service, one story illustrates his remarkable resilience. During a fierce battle on a hill known as Hill 382, Douglas Jacobson demonstrated unparalleled determination. Despite being one Marine amidst a fierce firefight, with an enemy force numbering in the hundreds and a short window of just 30 minutes to accomplish their mission, he refused to give up. Armed with a bazooka that was originally intended for 2 men, he single-handedly contributed to the fall of the strategic position. His unwavering refusal to stop, even in the face of overwhelming odds, was instrumental in securing victory. His bravery and resolve became an enduring symbol of heroism. If these stories of heroism and sacrifice resonate with you, as they do with us, I ask you to do a small favor. Please consider giving a like to this story. Every single like acts as a signal to platforms like YouTube to share these narratives more widely. It's a simple way to help ensure that these heroic deeds do not fade into obscurity. Additionally, engaging by subscribing and turning on notifications allows us to continue uncovering and preserving forgotten stories from dusty archives. Tales of Marines who, often with weapons designed for 2, saved entire companies, embodying genuine heroism. These are the stories of real people, real courage, and real sacrifice. Please take a moment to leave a comment and share where you're watching from. Whether you're tuning in from the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, or any other corner of the world, our community spans across continents and cultures. Remember, you're not merely an observer, but an essential part of a collective effort to keep these memories alive. Let us know your location, share if someone in your family has served, and remind us all of the importance of remembrance. Your participation helps preserve these stories for generations to come. Thank you sincerely for taking the time to watch this story and for helping ensure that Douglas Jacobson's legacy endures beyond silence and memory. These brave men who fought and sacrificed for their countries deserve to be remembered, valued, and celebrated. Through your support, you play a vital role in making sure their stories continue to inspire and remind us of the profound human spirit embedded in acts of true heroism.